She made it clear from the very beginning, no intimacy until after marriage. Darius respected her wish, waiting patiently for an entire year, each day bringing him closer to their big day. Finally, on their wedding night, he was eager to embrace what he had been longing for. But when they were alone in that hotel room, she moved slowly, uncertain. And then he saw it. A scar, subtle but unmistakable. Her voice trembled as she revealed the truth, a truth that would shatter everything they thought they knew about love. Darius Coleman's journey started in a place that seemed worlds apart from the fame his name would eventually carry. He grew up on the south side of Atlanta, in a modest duplex where Sundays were marked by the scent of fried cornbread and Saturdays by the smell of freshly polished floors. When Darius' parents separated, his grandmother, Ruth, became his guardian. She taught him that true character wasn't about what you said, but about how you acted when no one was around to see. She gave him 3 guiding principles. Always honor your word. Keep your hands clean and hold on to your faith. Darius lived by those rules every day, making them part of who he was. By his late 20s, he had built an HVAC business from the ground up. His white van, marked with neat vinyl lettering spelling Coleman Heating and Air, became a staple in the neighborhood, as recognizable as the church bell ringing on Sunday mornings. He was the kind of man who would fix a neighbor's broken AC on the hottest day of the year without expecting anything in return. The kind of man who stayed late to finish a job, knowing the client had young kids at home, and who arrived early at church, not to sit in the front row, but to set up chairs in the back. He didn't seek attention. He earned trust. When people called him patient, it wasn't just a compliment. It was clear in the way he listened, giving others the space to finish their thoughts before he spoke. For Darius, faith wasn't just something you did on Sundays. It was the foundation of his life. He read his Bible before the sun came up, gave generously without a second thought, and believed that life would reward you for your hard work as long as you didn't sacrifice your integrity. To him, marriage wasn't just an arrangement. It was a sacred covenant. The woman he chose to share his life with had to be someone he could build a future with, pray alongside, and grow old together. This conviction made him thoughtful about his relationships and cautious about rushing into love. His dream came true when he met Keisha Bryant. Keisha's story began in Macon, Georgia, where gospel music was woven into the fabric of her life. As familiar as family dinners and Saturday chores, the eldest of 3 siblings, she started singing in the choir loft. As soon as she was tall enough to stand on the small step stool, her voice was warm, confident, and effortlessly filled the room. Those who heard her sing often said she had a gift that could make you forget your worries, even if just for a moment. There were times when her seat in the alto section remained empty, and long stretches when she'd slip into church late, leaving before the final hymn. Keisha was charismatic, always quick to laugh, but there was a certain guardedness about her. She kept her past from spilling into casual conversation. Those who knew her well understood that she carried stories she didn't share easily, and she had mastered the art of controlling which parts of herself the world got to see. Her mother called it wisdom. Her friends sometimes called it secrecy. Keisha, however, called it survival. She was determined to keep moving forward, even if it meant leaving some parts of her story untold. Their paths first crossed in the spring of 2021 at a church fundraiser. The sanctuary had overflowed into the gym, where folding tables bent under the weight of trays filled with baked chicken and collard greens. The scent of cornbread filled the air, drifting toward the stage where the choir was wrapping up the evening with a song. Darius had come straight from a service call, wiping his hands on a rag when a deacon motioned for him to join the crowd. Keisha stepped forward, holding a cordless mic. She snapped her fingers twice to set the tempo and began a hymn, smoothly transitioning into a verse she had written herself. Darius noticed her immediately, not just for her voice, but for the way she made eye contact with those lingering at the back, gently drawing them in without pushing. Keisha noticed him standing by the service closet, not singing, but smiling as though the words still meant something to him. After the performance, they met near the dessert table. He complimented the unexpected bridge in her song. She responded, "Bridges only matter if they hold." It was a line that would linger in his mind long after that night. Their courtship began quietly, with no fanfare, just 2 people who understood the weight of unspoken things. He offered to help her aunt move a couch, and she sent him a plate of food when she cooked for her family. They swapped playlists of quartet, gospel and classic soul, hers, a mix of uplifting hymns and vintage R&B. Soon, they started leaving each other short voice notes instead of texts, because hearing the other's breath between words felt more intimate. On Wednesday nights, they sat side by side during Bible study, their shoulders nearly brushing but never quite touching. Their conversations stretched out in the parking lot long after the lesson had ended. Keisha set her most important boundary early. One evening, in a diner booth lit by flickering fluorescent lights, she told Darius she wouldn't have sex before marriage. She spoke plainly, explaining it as a deep, religious conviction, a promise she had made to God after facing tough seasons in her past. There was no hesitation in her voice, and no need for excuses. Darius listened carefully, weighing her words as he always did. To him, this wasn't a barrier, it was a testament to her discipline and faith. He respected it fully, not as something to be challenged, but as a boundary to be honored. From that night on, he respected her boundary, shaping their time together around it. Daytime outings, group hangouts, and early goodnights. Waiting wasn't always easy, but he believed it would make their first night together all the more meaningful. Their friends noticed how effortlessly they fit together. Darius never tried to outshine her, and Keisha never made him feel small for speaking softly. They shared the same approach to conflict: no raised voices, no slammed doors, just space to cool down and then come back to the table. They laughed often, sometimes over the simplest things. And when they talked about the future, it wasn't in grand, sweeping gestures. It was more about the quiet certainty that they were building something together, step by step. It was in the small things, grocery lists, holiday plans, and quiet reassurances, that they knew they were building something real. Their families blended almost seamlessly. Darius' grandmother took an immediate liking to Keisha, impressed by her respectfulness and the way she offered to help without being prompted. Keisha's mother, Regina, admired Darius' patience and his ability to listen, even when their opinions didn't always align. Family dinners became a regular part of their lives, and their relationship became the kind of example church members often referred to during sermons on love and faith. By the end of the year, Darius was certain he wanted to marry her. The proposal wasn't grand, just a picnic by the lake on a crisp afternoon, with fried chicken in a paper bag and a velvet box he had been quietly paying off in installments. He asked her simply, no rehearsed speech, just a promise of a life built on partnership and faith. Keisha said yes, her words mixed with tears and laughter. They sat by the water, letting the decision settle in, choosing to savor the moment before sharing the news with anyone. Wedding planning came with the usual debates, guest lists, budgets, colors, but they tackled it together as a team. She wanted greenery instead of roses, and he wanted to make sure there was enough food so no one left hungry. They divided the tasks based on their strengths. She handled the negotiations with vendors, and he took charge of keeping the schedule on track. Throughout it all, their vow to wait remained unshaken, an unspoken reminder that their first night together would be both a spiritual and physical milestone. As the big day neared, friends described them as unshakable. They had weathered the tests of time, temptation, and busy schedules, emerging with their bond stronger than ever. Neither of them could have predicted how soon that perfect image would be tested, or how much one night could unravel years of trust. If you were in Darius' shoes, promised a life built on shared faith and boundaries, what would you expect to know before saying I do? How would you react if the truth came out after the vows? This channel thrives thanks to viewers like you. Plus, you can enjoy even more benefits, like custom loyalty badges, exclusive members-only shorts, live streams, and much more when you join our membership community. At New Hope Baptist, the name Darius and Keisha held weight, not the kind that comes from scandal or gossip, but the kind that builds over time, service after service, until everyone knows exactly who you're referring to without needing a last name. They were the couple people pointed to during Sunday school lessons about patience and faith. The ushers smiled whenever they walked in. The choir director made a point to mention their engagement during rehearsal. In a congregation where everyone seemed to notice everything, Darius and Keisha appeared steady, aligned, and safe, a couple whose presence brought a sense of calm and certainty. And yet, perfection is a tricky thing. It leaves no room for uneven edges. for pauses that stretch just a moment too long, or for questions that go unanswered. From the outside, it's hard to tell whether you're witnessing the whole truth or just the parts someone is willing to reveal. Keisha's mother, Regina Bryant, spoke fondly of Darius, calling him respectful, hardworking, and a man who truly stepped up for her daughter. But the warmth in her voice changed when the conversation turned to Keisha's past relationships. Regina's gaze dropped for a moment, and she paused before responding. Keisha, she had her seasons, Regina said slowly, carefully selecting each word as though it might be weighed later. She didn't elaborate on what those seasons were, and when the conversation shifted back, her smile returned, polite but unreadable, as she steered the discussion toward the wedding guest list. On its own, that small hesitation might not have meant much. Parents often withhold certain details of their children's pasts, but looking back, it felt like the faintest hint of something bigger, something Regina didn't want to put into words. Others had picked up on her carefulness as well. At the bridal shower, a friend had joked about all the frogs you had to kiss before finding your prince. Keisha laughed easily, but Regina's gaze snapped quickly to the person speaking, and the room's laughter faded. Another guest pointed out how Regina would always change the subject whenever ex-boyfriends were mentioned. Her tone would shift, and her hands would find something else to occupy themselves with. Two names, however, continued to surface in conversations with friends and family: Marcus Taylor and Tyrone Ellis. No one ever gave a complete story, but their presence was unmistakable, like bookmarks left in a chapter that had never been read aloud. Marcus was referred to as a childhood sweetheart, someone who had known Keisha since high school. Tyrone, on the other hand, was mentioned as a former coworker from a few years later. Their names were mentioned in hushed tones, always tied to the past, never the present. People knew them well enough to say their names, but not well enough, or perhaps not willing, to explain further. Even Darius's closest friends admitted they knew almost nothing about Keisha's dating history. We figured she'd dated before, one groomsman said. But Darius never brought it up, and we didn't ask. He was happy, and that was enough. That kind of trust is common in relationships where the bond seems unbreakable. People often assume that the important conversations have already taken place. It's easy to forget that assumptions, no matter how well-meaning, aren't the same as the truth. Keisha's friends in the choir remembered her as someone who always showed up when you needed her. She'd drive across town to help with a last-minute event or check in after a tough rehearsal. But when it came to her own life, she had a way of deflecting the spotlight. She'd ask about your kids, your job, your plans, until you suddenly realized you hadn't learned anything new about her in months. She wasn't closed off, one alto explained. She just kept certain doors locked. Back then, no one thought much of it. Now, those locked doors look different. In situations like this, where the outside world only sees the highlight reel, it's often the smallest details that stand out. The way someone's voice tightens at a certain name, the seconds that slip away in a conversation. When a particular topic feels too risky, those are the hints at what's being kept hidden. Sometimes those details are overlooked because they seem too small to matter. Other times, they're ignored because noticing them would mean admitting the picture might not be as perfect as it seems. The truth is, in their circle, Darius and Keisha were above reproach. They didn't live together before the wedding, which earned approving nods from the older generation. They attended church events together, volunteered for ministry projects, and seemed to share the same values, right down to the smallest detail. People saw what they wanted to see. Two people walking in perfect harmony toward a shared future. And in fairness, nothing outwardly suggested otherwise. But perception can create its own kind of barrier. When a couple has a flawless reputation, it becomes harder to ask questions that might tarnish it. That's part of why no one questioned the silences surrounding Marcus and Tyrone, or the way Regina would intervene to keep certain stories from coming to light. And in fairness, nothing outwardly suggested otherwise. But perception can create its own kind of barrier. When a couple has a flawless reputation, it becomes harder to ask questions that might tarnish it. That's part of why no one questioned the silences surrounding Marcus and Tyrone, or the way Regina would intervene to keep certain stories from coming to light. But as the investigation would later reveal, those outlines mattered. They were pieces of the bigger picture that neither Darius nor those around him could see clearly at the time. When we look back and piece together what happened, it's impossible not to think about this chapter. The friends who spoke with certainty, the mother who spoke with caution, the names that lingered without context. These aren't the kinds of details that, in relationships by themselves, they're the kind that sit quietly, unnoticed, until something else brings them into the light. We share them now because they help explain how quickly things can change and how easily trust can be built on a version of the truth that isn't the whole truth. Sometimes the warning signs are loud. Other times they're subtle enough to be overlooked. Until they aren't. If you were about to marry someone and their family carefully avoided answering questions about certain parts of their past, would you push for answers, even if it risked the relationship? Or would you choose to trust them completely? Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you're watching from. The morning of August 13th, 2022, began like every wedding day should, full of movement, laughter, and that kind of small chaos that feels like part of the celebration. At Regina Bryant's home, the air was filled with the faint scent of hairspray and warm pastries, with curling irons buzzing in the background as friends helped Keisha into her gown. The dress was simple yet elegant, with ivory lace along the sleeves and a skirt that flowed gently without too much volume. Exactly as she had planned. She stood before the mirror, her friends adjusting the hem, one of them slipping lip gloss into her clutch, just in case. Keisha's smile was wide, but every so often, she would press her hands together in front of her, as if steadying herself. In another part of town, Darius was already at the venue, pacing the aisle between the rows of chairs. His best man tried to lighten the mood with jokes, but Darius kept checking his watch, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He wasn't nervous about marrying her. He was nervous about everything going smoothly, about the day meeting the expectations he had for what it represented. By late morning, guests began arriving. The venue, a modest church with whitewashed walls and polished pews, filled with murmured greetings and the soft shuffle of programs. Outside, the Georgia heat pressed down, but inside, the air conditioning hummed quietly. Darius stood at the front, adjusting his tie, the pastor offering him a reassuring nod. When the doors finally opened and Keisha stepped in, the room seemed to hold its breath. Her gown caught the light in gentle ripples as she walked, her arm linked through her mother's. Darius's face broke into a smile that seemed unshakable, the kind of expression people mention when they say, you could see the love in his eyes. Keisha's gaze met his halfway down the aisle, and for a moment, it felt like there was no one else in the room. The vows were personal, carefully chosen, and heavy with emotion. Darius spoke first, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. He promised to stand by her in times of joy and hardship, to protect their union, and to love her without condition or deadline. Keisha's vows were calm, her tone warm as she thanked him for his patience, his steadfastness, and for choosing her with a full heart and open eyes. Guests later remembered that line, full heart and open eyes, and how perfect it seemed in that moment. But in hindsight, it carried an ache no one could have foreseen. Rings were exchanged, hands were held, and the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. Applause filled the sanctuary, echoing off the walls as they walked back down the aisle together, smiling as cameras flashed around them. Outside, the sun was still high, and the reception was already in full swing. Tables were dressed with greenery, just as Keisha had envisioned, and trays of food lined the back wall. The DJ played a blend of gospel, soul, and light R&B, setting a laid-back, joyful tone that filled the air. Their first dance was simple and unpretentious, no rehearsed choreography, just the two of them swaying slowly, eyes locked, as if the music belonged to them alone. Guests gathered around the floor, clapping and singing along when the song shifted to something upbeat. Laughter rippled through the room when the best man shared a story about Darius's legendary patience during the early days of dating, and Keisha's maid of honor recalled how her friend's voice softened every time she spoke about him. Throughout the afternoon, they made their rounds, greeting each table. Keisha hugged relatives she hadn't seen in years, while Darius shook hands with friends from his HVAC business. In every photo, they appeared like people at the beginning of something steady, shoulders angled toward each other, hands brushing, faces open and full of promise. One guest later described them as glowing, not just from the day itself, but from the sense of security they seemed to share in each other. Plates were cleared, dessert was served, and the bouquet was tossed amid laughter and playful competition. For hours, there was no sign, no hesitation, no shadow of anything out of place. As evening fell, the celebration slowly began to wind down. Guests trickled out, some lingering by the door for one last hug or photo. Darius and Keisha slipped away briefly to thank the catering staff, then returned to gather the last of their things. The best man carried a stack of wrapped gifts to the car, while Regina oversaw the packing of leftover food for family members to take home. Someone caught them on a cell phone camera as they left the reception, a grainy clip. The kind you'd expect to see posted online with a caption like, "Just married." In the video, they're holding hands, smiling, walking toward the car as a guest calls out a final congratulations. Keisha turns to wave, her veil catching gently in the breeze, and Darius opens the passenger door for her. It was an ordinary end to a day that had been extraordinary in its joy. They were still in their wedding clothes, the light from the street lamps casting a soft glow over the sidewalk as they drove away. Friends who saw them last remember nothing but happiness. In those final public moments, there was no hint that within hours, this marriage would become a police case. No one watching could have imagined that the next time they saw Darius and Keisha's names together, it would be in headlines. That's the thing about wedding days. They're meant to be remembered for joy. Every smile, every dance, every word of the vows is preserved in photos and videos, stitched into the collective memory of everyone present. But for those closest to this story, those memories now coexist with the knowledge of what happened next. It's a contrast that's difficult to reconcile. The perfect image of the day and the devastating reality of the night that followed. If you were in Darius's position, standing at the altar, believing you knew everything that mattered about the person you were marrying, would you still want to know every part of their past, even if it risked changing how you saw them? Share your honest thoughts in the comments. The ride from the reception to the hotel was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like the end of a long, joyful day. Darius kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting loosely on his thigh, the hum of the engine and the soft rhythm of passing streetlights filling the space between them. In his mind, the night was already written, the beginning of their married life, where the promise they had both kept gave way to something new. For over a year, he had honored her boundary without hesitation, seeing it as a sign of mutual respect and trust. The anticipation wasn't frantic or impatient. It was steady, thoughtful, just like the way he approached everything that truly mattered. The suite looked exactly as he had pictured it when he booked it weeks before, a king-sized bed with a carved wooden frame, warm golden lights spilling from the bedside lamps, and the soft hum of the air conditioning cutting through the summer heat. They set their bags down, shared a tired laugh, and Keisha went into the bathroom with her overnight bag. Darius removed his tie, pulled back the covers, and dimmed the lights, already picturing how the night would unfold. When she came out barefoot, still in her gown, she moved slowly toward the bed. At first, he thought it was just the shyness that sometimes comes with the first night together. He smiled to reassure her, but then he saw it. As she adjusted her dress, the fabric shifted just enough to reveal a thin, pale scar across her abdomen. It wasn't the kind of scar you get from an accident. His voice was gentle but curious when he asked, "What's this from?" She hesitated, her gaze shifting away before locking with his again. Her voice remained steady, but the words seemed to weigh on her. She told him she had 2 children, both sons, from 2 different men. The first was Marcus Taylor, her high school sweetheart. They met in her junior year, and for a while, she believed he would be her future. But Marcus got mixed up with the wrong crowd. His charm and ambition were overtaken by a string of poor decisions, one of which led to an armed robbery charge. By the time her son was born, Marcus was already serving a lengthy prison sentence. The second, Tyrone Ellis, was a coworker she met years later at a local logistics company. He was older, smooth-talking, and quick with promises that disappeared the moment she told him she was pregnant. Within weeks, he stopped answering her calls, leaving her to face another pregnancy on her own. Both children were currently living with Regina, her mother, who cared for them with the belief that they needed stability while Keisha focused on rebuilding her life. She shared that she had learned the hard way that intimacy without commitment could cost more than she was willing to pay. So, after her second child, she made herself a promise: no more sex until marriage. She explained to Darius that the boundary wasn't meant to deceive him, but to protect her future. For a moment, he was silent. The room felt smaller, the hum of the air conditioning suddenly too loud in his ears. "You deceived me," he said at last, the words coming slowly but with weight. "I thought we were starting fresh. I thought we were building something from the ground up." His voice was tight, his mind replaying every conversation, where he had believed she was being honest with him. It wasn't just about the children. It was the fact that this truth had been hidden in the shadows. The entire time they had been together. Keisha reached for him, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't want to lose you," she said, her voice breaking. "I was afraid you'd walk away before you knew all of me. I thought if I waited, you'd see me for who I am now, not who I was." She searched his face for a sign that he understood, that he could look beyond the hurt. But the weight of it was too much for him to process in that moment. He stood up, the air in the room suddenly thick with tension, and moved toward the door. "I can't, not right now," he said, shaking his head. She stepped in front of him, her bare feet barely making a sound on the carpet, her grip on his arm firm. "Please, don't leave," she pleaded. Her voice was desperate, her eyes filled with tears, and her body angled to block his path to the door. He pulled his arm back, not with the intent to hurt, but with the force of someone trying to break free. His movement threw her off balance, her foot catching the edge of the rug as she stumbled. The back of her head struck the carved wooden bed frame with a sharp, hollow sound that echoed in the silence. For a brief moment, they both froze. She winced, bringing a hand to the back of her head, and told him she was fine, just shaken. He hesitated, caught between staying and the overwhelming urge to leave the room. In his mind, every thought collided. The vows they'd just made, the truth she had hidden, the echo of that impact still ringing in his ears. He grabbed his jacket and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. Down the hall, his footsteps quickened, uneven with emotion. He didn't look back. Inside the suite, Keisha sat on the floor, breathing slowly, her back pressed against the bed. The blood that started to seep from the small wound at the back of her head was hidden by her hair, unnoticed in the dim light. The air conditioner hummed softly. Outside, the city lights blinked as they always did, unaware that this marriage, only hours old, had already fractured beyond repair. If you discovered on your wedding night that the person you married had hidden children from past relationships, not out of malice, but out of fear, would you see it as a forgivable omission? Or would you feel the trust was broken before the marriage even began? Share your thoughts in the comments. When Darius left the hotel room, the cool air of the hallway hit him like a splash of water. He walked quickly, unwilling to look back, not ready to process everything that had just happened. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, the soft background music almost mocking in its calmness. In the lobby, he kept his head low, his eyes fixed on the glass doors ahead. Outside, the night air was thick, humid, and heavy, wrapping around him as he stepped into the parking lot. He got into his car, started the engine, and pulled out, his mind drifting. No destination in sight. For the next several hours, he drove aimlessly through the quiet streets, the city lights blurring past. His mind was a storm of anger, disbelief, and confusion. He replayed her words over and over. 2 children, 2 fathers. Years of silence about a truth she had carried all this time. He felt betrayed, but the feeling was tangled with something deeper, loss. This wasn't the marriage he thought he was stepping into just hours earlier. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, his jaw clenched. He told himself he needed space, time to think, to clear his head before they spoke again. But beneath that reasoning was a truth he couldn't yet admit to himself. He didn't know if he could ever see her the same way again. August 14th, 2022, 6:17 a.m. Back at the hotel, the night gave way to the early signs of morning. The carpeted halls were silent, with only the occasional sound of a closing door, or an elevator bell breaking the stillness. Inside the suite, Keisha had managed to climb into bed after he left. Whether from shock, exhaustion, or both, she lay still, her head resting against a pillow that was slowly becoming damp.